Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Kristen Lear from Bat Conservation International. Today I will be talking about pollinating bats and the work that Bat Conservation International is doing to save 3 species of pollinating bats in the Southwest US and Mexico. So welcome to BCI. We are a nonprofit that works around the world to end bat extinctions worldwide. And we are currently leading the Agave Restoration Initiative, which I will share more about, and how we're working with communities and people across both Mexico and the Southwest United States. So there are 3 species of nectar-feeding bats that migrate annually between the Southwest US and Mexico. These are the endangered Mexican long-nosed bat, which is endangered internationally as well as in the United States. The lesser long-nosed bat was delisted in the US in 2018, which is great news, but it is still near threatened by the IUCN. And the Mexican long-tongued bat is also near threatened, and all 3 of these species face challenges from habitat loss. So these species are long-distance migrators. This is the range maps of the Mexican long-nosed bat and the lesser long-nosed bat, ranging all the way from central Mexico up into the Southwest US in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. And these 3 bat species undergo long-distance migrations, over 750 miles every year between their mating roosts in central Mexico and their maternity roosts in the northern Mexico and the US. And along that migratory route, they are feeding on the nectar of plants, particularly agave plants that provide this really energy-rich nectar. And in the process, these bats are pollinating the agaves. They are one of the primary pollinators for agaves in general, and for some species of agaves, bats are the most effective pollinators. And agave plants are critical food resources, particularly for pregnant and lactating mother bats who are raising their young in Northeast Mexico and in the Southwest US, where in many places agave plants are the only natural food source for these mother bats to successfully raise their young. And agaves, you probably have heard of agaves because they are the plant that is used to make tequila and mezcal. So agaves are these very important cultural and economic plants. They support production of liquor. They also are used by many rural communities in Mexico to make other food products like agave syrup. They are used to build houses and fences, their big stalks. The leaves and the stalks are used to feed livestock, especially in times of drought. And the whole plants themselves are planted to help control erosion or to serve as living fences to delineate property boundaries. So agaves are very important not only for bats, but also for people. Now, unfortunately, along that 750 plus mile migratory pathway, we are seeing increasing habitat and land degradation, and these are the landscapes that these bats are encountering more and more. And it's really important to remember that it's primarily the pregnant females that are undergoing this long distance migration while they're pregnant and then raising their babies in these areas with this degraded land. So this habitat loss, the loss of agave plants, the fragmentation of agave patches along that corridor has led to population declines of these species. And the Mexican long-nosed bat populations are estimated to have halved in the past several decades, in part due to this habitat loss. So what if we could take landscapes that look like this and turn them into landscapes that look like this, with healthy soils, healthy native grasses and native vegetation, and healthy, thriving agave populations to help feed these bats and to support people who use agaves for their livelihoods. That is the goal of BCI's Agave Restoration Initiative, to restore healthy agave landscapes near those migratory roosts as well as along that full migratory corridor to support bats and people. And our vision is to restore a binational migratory corridor that is safeguarded by a network of community-based conservation. So bringing people together to restore this landscape for the bats and to support livelihoods. Now, this is that corridor again, and overlaid are these red stars where BCI is currently working through our agave restoration initiative to restore the landscapes with many, many diverse partners. We're currently working in 9 US and Mexican states with over 100 partners, including ejido communities in Mexico and private landowners, tribal communities, native plant nurseries, and NGOs, state and federal agencies, researchers, and industry. And these are just some of the partners shown here. But this is a very all hands on deck effort. Now I want to take you through kind of the story of the migration and how these bats are migrating through these areas and what they're encountering along the way in terms of people coming together to help them. This is talking about those pollinator connections of how these bats that are migrating are connecting people across political boundaries. So let's start down here in central Mexico, near Mexico City. The one sole known mating roost for the endangered Mexican long-nosed bat is found here. This is Cueva del Diablo, and it is the only known roost where males and females come together, they mate in the fall, and then they separate, and then in the spring, the females, while they're pregnant, start their migration northward, while the males stay put. So we're starting here. Now, those females leave in the spring. They migrate northward. We're focusing on the endangered Mexican long-nosed bat here, but the story is similar for the lesser long-nosed bat through western Mexico. So these Mexican long-nosed bats, these little pregnant mothers, migrate to southern Nuevo León, Zacatecas, San Luis Potosí, and in these areas, they encounter landscapes that often look like this. We're in the high elevation Sierra Madre Oriental mountains. It's lush pine oak deciduous forest with agaves as a key part of the landscape. And this may look lush and beautiful with all these agaves, but if you notice, there's a lot of these agave stalks that are cut off. They're just kind of short. That's because a lot of people in these communities harvest and use agaves to make products like alcohol, for example, to sell on local markets or to consume. And so in these areas, we're working with the local communities to support sustainable agave use and community businesses that derive benefit from agaves. So working with the ejidatarios to create these practices that support sustainable agave populations while supporting the community. And we are also with these communities building nurseries, plant nurseries, to grow these agaves, thousands and thousands of agaves for restoration and for use, and then planting those agaves with the communities in their landscapes. And these nurseries, importantly, can be used for other plants besides agaves. So they can be used to grow vegetables for local consumption, medicinal plants, other plants for restoration. So these nurseries not only support agave restoration for bats, but also community livelihoods. Now, we're here in southern Nuevo León. Let's continue our migratory journey north. They kind of go up through the mountains, and they reach several areas where they have maternity roosts. And these are the roosts, the caves, where the mothers give birth to their babies. So that's great. This is those little bats. The pregnant, you can see how big their bellies are, and then the one on the right, the mother has her baby. They give birth to one baby per year. And unfortunately, like we saw before, these landscapes here are often looking like this, with the degraded soil, degraded habitat, no agaves from unsustainable grazing is a big thing, farming converging to agriculture. So these are threatening those little mother bats and their babies. So in these areas, we work with, again, the communities and local NGO partners to restore the land. So we're working to implement sustainable grazing practices, soil and water restoration practices on these community lands, and then pairing that with planting of these native agaves that we're growing with the local communities. And because cattle grazing in particular has a big impact on habitat and agave populations, we're working with the communities here in particular to create exclusion areas. So not huge, but big enough exclusion areas that these agave patches can be protected and provide these little nectar hotspots for the bats, while the people can continue grazing their lands in other areas and learning how to implement those sustainable grazing practices. And we are working with several of these communities to develop sustainable ranching businesses. So we've worked with a group of ranchers that is developing organic certification for their cattle that is also based on sustainable use of agave habitat. So all of this, again, trying to support that native habitat. And in these areas, because we have those roosts that are important, we work with the communities who own these caves. They're on the land of these communities. And the community members form brigades to monitor these roosts and monitor how the bats are doing long term. So we work very closely with them to provide the training, the equipment on how to do this monitoring so they can see how their own bats in their backyards are doing. So now we're here, the mother bats are they've given birth and are raising their young, and then they continue migrating. Sometimes they give birth a little more north, but this area up here into Texas and New Mexico is where the mother bats and their babies spend the late summer and the early fall before migrating back south. So in this area, again, we're seeing these landscapes that should be, either desert grasslands or Chihuahuan desert scrub habitat. And unfortunately, more and more, we're seeing this historic grazing is a big issue in this area, where there's just not good, healthy habitat to support agave populations. So again, we're facing the threat of the loss of these agaves. And so in these areas, we're working with, again, nurseries. We work with local nonprofit nurseries as well as university nurseries across these states to grow out these little baby agaves to plant. And then when they're big enough, we plant those agaves with community members on people's properties, in community gardens, as well as on federal and state lands. And we're more and more working with ranchers to develop, again, that sustainable land management for grazing, since grazing has a big effect on agaves here. So again, implementing these plantings with sustainable use and also restoration. We're starting more grassland restoration to restore that broader habitat to make sure those agaves survive long term. And then a really exciting aspect that we've been spearheading the past few years is our community science effort to bring people together to research and study how these bats are moving through the landscape and where we need to be targeting agave restoration efforts. And so BCI of the past few years has been leading a groundbreaking eDNA, or environmental DNA, methodology for surveying for these nectar feeding bats. So the really cool thing about these bats is, well, first of all, they are hard to study and find in the wild because they are considered whispering bats. They have a very low call for acoustic recording, so it's hard to pick them up just out on the landscape with acoustic detectors, which is a common bat method of monitoring. And unfortunately, the only way to tell the endangered Mexican long-nosed bat from the related species, the lesser long-nosed bat, is to catch them in hand and use morphological measurements to tell them apart. And that, of course, is pretty invasive. And so we don't want to do that as little as we can. And so this is where eDNA comes in, because as you can see from this cool picture, these bats, when they're feeding on these agave flowers, are messy eaters. They leave behind quite a bit of spit or saliva on the plants. And then the cool thing is that we can then use that. We can sample and swab from the agave flowers with these long polyester swabs attached to a long pole. We can swab these flowers when they're in bloom and send those samples off to the lab, and they can tell us exactly which species was visiting the flowers. So this is a very non-invasive way to find out where these bats are going. And the cool thing is that in a lot of these places in Arizona, New Mexico, and some in Texas, people have hummingbird feeders out. And these bats love to eat from hummingbird feeders. It's not the most nutritionally good source of food. And there are issues with hummingbird feeders and migration with bats and birds. But at least this is giving us an opportunity to tap into that resource that's out there to find out where these bats are. So we created a citizen science network across Southeast Arizona, Southwestern New Mexico, and then West Texas to have people swab their hummingbird feeders to see what bats are there. And excitingly, so we've been doing this all throughout that kind of brown circle and on the limits of that brown circle. And excitingly, we detected the endangered Mexican longnose bat in Arizona for the first time using this eDNA method. So we detected it in a new state, and press release forthcoming, we have also detected this endangered bat further north than they have ever been detected before in New Mexico. We have detected them over 100 miles north of the only known roost for the Mexican longnose bat in the Boot Heel of New Mexico. Showing that this area in the red is likely becoming a climate refugia. There was some climate modeling papers a couple years ago that showed that this northwestward expansion is likely happening with these nectar bats. And sure enough, this eDNA work is corroborating those models, showing that these kind of north and northwestward areas are becoming more important for these bats. So we're focusing more and more our restoration efforts in these areas to make sure that there is good agave habitat and good food for these bats as they continue that shift long term. So our impact, some quick numbers, where we stand with the Agave Restoration Initiative. We, to date, over the past about 7 years, have planted, well, now it's a little more than 182,000 native agaves across that binational corridor, restored over 2,000 acres of land with communities, with federal and state partners, with industry, and supported 26 nurseries, either building nurseries from scratch or supporting infrastructure improvements of these native plant nurseries in the US and Mexico to grow out agaves. And we are currently supporting 40 landowners and communities who are benefiting from this land restoration, from agave populations that they can use. And these numbers are growing. By 2035, our aim is to plant and restore over 500,000 agaves, 500,000, that will then propagate into over 2 million agaves, and then restore over 95,000 hectares of land. So this is a big initiative, and it is all brought together by over 100 partners who are working together to save this bat. I love these pictures. These are just some of our partners. And I just think that it's such a beautiful story of how this little tiny bat can bring together such diverse people in diverse areas, all working together to not only sustain the bat, but to support their livelihoods, all brought together by this little tiny bat that's migrating across this landscape, bringing together all of these people. So thank you. I want to make sure we have time for questions. If you want to get in touch, there's my email. And of course, please follow Bat Conservation International on, well, X now, Instagram. We're on Facebook and TikTok. And if you're interested in learning more about the Agave Restoration Initiative, these two links below, the QR codes can be used to find our website and to listen to some really cool videos about the restoration that's happening with local communities. So thank you all, and I look forward to your questions.